Police officers beat up an elderly black man, confident of their impunity, but they had no idea that his son was someone they never wanted to meet. How will this terrible incident end? Will justice prevail, and what consequences await those who committed this crime? The sun dipped low in the late autumn sky, casting long shadows over the streets of Eastwood. 70-year-old Marcus Thompson navigated his wheelchair along the cracked sidewalks, the chill in the air nipping at his cheeks. He had just finished his weekly visit to the local bank, a simple errand that he insisted on doing himself. Despite his physical limitations, Marcus valued his independence fiercely. His son, Daniel Thompson, a prominent attorney and activist in the city of Riverdale, often offered to help, but Marcus always declined with a warm smile. As he made his way home, Marcus listened to the distant sounds of children playing and leaves rustling in the breeze. He wore a well-worn coat and a knitted scarf, his briefcase resting neatly in his lap. His eyes, still sharp and full of life, took in the familiar sights of his neighborhood. He had lived here for over 30 years and had seen it change in many ways, but it was still home. Turning onto Maple Street, a quieter road lined with old oak trees, Marcus noticed two police officers approaching from the opposite direction. They were white, stern-faced, and their uniforms were crisp in the cool air. Something about their demeanor made Marcus uneasy, but he pushed the thought aside. He had done nothing wrong. "Hey, you," one of the officers called out sharply as they neared. He was tall with a shaved head, his eyes narrowed and fixed on Marcus. Marcus stopped his wheelchair and looked up. "Yes, officer. Is there a problem?" "Yeah," he asked politely. "We need to see your ID," the tall officer demanded, stepping closer. Marcus frowned slightly. "May I ask why? I've just come from the bank and am heading home." "We ask the questions," the second officer snapped. He was shorter, stockier, his gaze just as piercing. "Show us your ID." Feeling a knot tighten in his stomach, Marcus reached into his briefcase. His hands trembled ever so slightly as he handed over his identification. The tall officer snatched it from his hand, barely glancing at it before passing it to his partner. "This doesn't look real," he muttered. "It's my ID," Marcus asserted calmly. "I've lived in this neighborhood for decades." The stocky officer smirked. "You don't seem like you belong around here. What's in the briefcase?" "Just personal items," Marcus replied, a hint of irritation creeping into his voice. "I have every right to be here." "We'll see about that," the tall officer said, yanking the briefcase from Marcus's lap. He began rifling through it, papers and personal belongings scattering onto the sidewalk. "Hey, you can't do that!" Marcus protested. "That's my property." "Looks like we have a troublemaker," the stocky officer sneered. "Maybe you're hiding something." "I have nothing to hide," Marcus said firmly. "I know my rights." "People like you need to learn some respect," the tall officer retorted, stepping menacingly close. "People like me?" Marcus echoed, his eyes meeting the officer's without flinching. "What exactly do you mean by that?" The officer's lip curled into a contemptuous smile. "You're under arrest for disorderly conduct." Before Marcus could respond, the officers grabbed the handles of his wheelchair and began pushing him toward their squad car. "Let me go! This is unlawful!" Marcus shouted, trying to resist. "Stop resisting," the stocky officer barked, his grip tightening. A few bystanders began to gather, their faces reflecting shock and concern. Some pulled out their phones, recording the unfolding scene. "Leave him alone," a woman called out. "He hasn't done anything wrong." "Mind your own business," the tall officer snapped back. As they reached the squad car, the officers attempted to haul Marcus out of his wheelchair. He clutched the armrests, his knuckles white. "You're making this harder on yourself," the stocky officer growled. "You're violating my rights," Marcus said through gritted teeth. The tall officer's patience wore thin. With a swift motion, he struck Marcus across the face. The crowd gasped. Marcus felt a sharp pain explode in his cheek, his vision blurring. "Hey, you can't do that!" someone in the crowd shouted. "Stay back," the officer warned, his hand moving toward his taser. Marcus tasted blood but refused to show weakness. "This is assault," he managed to say. "You'll pay for this. Big talk for someone in your position," the stocky officer mocked. Amidst the chaos, a voice rang out from the back of the crowd. "What's going on here?" The crowd parted to reveal Daniel Thompson, his tall frame and commanding presence unmistakable. He had been on his way to visit his father when he noticed the commotion. "Dad?" Daniel's eyes widened as he took in the scene, his father bruised, the officers looming over him. "And who are you?" the tall officer demanded. Daniel's jaw tightened. "I'm his son, Daniel Thompson, attorney at law. What's the meaning of this?" "Your old man was resisting arrest," the stocky officer replied smugly. "Resisting arrest? On what grounds?" Daniel challenged, stepping closer. "He was being disorderly," the tall officer said, but his confidence wavered under Daniel's piercing gaze. "I've been recording the whole thing," a bystander interjected, holding up her phone. "They attacked him without cause." Daniel looked at the officers. "Release him now, or I will see to it that you're both charged with assault and unlawful arrest." "He's lying," the stocky officer said hastily. "This isn't any of your concern." "It's very much my concern," Daniel retorted. "And judging by the number of witnesses and recordings, I'd say you're in a lot of trouble." The officers exchanged nervous glances. The crowd was growing larger, their murmurs turning into vocal outrage. "Fine," the tall officer muttered. "But we're reporting this." "You do that," Daniel said coldly. He moved to his father's side, gently touching his shoulder. "Dad, are you okay?" Marcus nodded weakly. "I'm fine now that you're here." The officers retreated to their car, the crowd jeering as they left. Daniel watched them go, his expression a mix of relief and simmering anger. "Let's get you home," he said softly. That evening, Daniel sat across from his father in the cozy living room of Marcus's modest home. The warmth of the fireplace did little to ease the chill that had settled over them. "This can't go unanswered," Daniel said firmly. "They need to be held accountable." "I agree," Marcus replied, "but we have to be smart about this." "I'll contact some colleagues, gather the evidence," Daniel continued. "The videos, witness statements, we can build a strong case." Marcus placed a hand on his son's arm. "Daniel, promise me you won't let this consume you." Daniel met his father's gaze. "They attacked you, Dad. I can't just let that go." "I know, but remember why you fight. For justice, not revenge." Daniel nodded slowly. "You're right, justice." Over the next few days, Daniel worked tirelessly. The videos had gone viral, sparking outrage across the community. Protests formed outside the police station, demanding accountability. The police department released a brief statement, claiming the incident was under investigation. But Daniel knew better than to rely on their internal processes. He filed a formal complaint and initiated legal action against the officers and the department. The media caught wind of the story, and soon, Daniel found himself at the center of a growing movement against police brutality. One afternoon, Daniel held a press conference outside the courthouse. Cameras flashed as he stepped up to the podium. "My father was unjustly attacked by those sworn to protect and serve," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This is not an isolated incident, but a symptom of a deeper issue within our law enforcement system." He outlined the legal steps he was taking and called for systemic reforms. The crowd cheered, their support palpable. Weeks later, the case went to trial. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, activists, concerned citizens all gathered to witness the proceedings. Daniel stood confidently before the jury, presenting the evidence meticulously. The videos were damning, showing the officers' unprovoked aggression. The defense attempted to paint Marcus as non-compliant, but their arguments fell flat. Witness after witness testified on Marcus's behalf, their accounts consistent and compelling. In his closing statement, Daniel addressed the jury passionately. "This case is about more than my father," he said. "It's about justice for all who have been marginalized and mistreated. We must send a clear message that abuse of power will not be tolerated." The jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning with a verdict, guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in applause. The officers were sentenced, and the police department faced heavy scrutiny, leading to policy changes and mandatory training on racial bias and disability awareness. Outside the courthouse, Daniel embraced his father. "We did it," he said, a mixture of relief and triumph in his voice. Marcus smiled softly. "You did it, son. I'm proud of you." "This is just the beginning," Daniel replied. "There's still so much work to be done." In the months that followed, Daniel became a leading voice for police reform. He spoke at rallies, participated in panel discussions, and worked with lawmakers to draft legislation aimed at preventing similar incidents. Marcus continued to support his son's efforts, attending events when he could, his presence a powerful reminder of the real people affected by injustice. One evening, they sat together on Marcus's front porch, the sounds of the neighborhood enveloping them. The sky was painted with hues of orange and pink as the sun set. "You know," Marcus began thoughtfully, "I always believed that one person could make a difference." Daniel looked at him. "You've made a difference in so many lives, Dad, including mine." Marcus chuckled softly. "Perhaps, but what you're doing now, it has the potential to change the course of history." Daniel sighed. "Sometimes it feels overwhelming. The system is so entrenched." "Change isn't easy," Marcus acknowledged, "but it's necessary, and you're not alone in this." Daniel nodded, taking comfort in his father's words. "I just hope that what we're doing will lead to lasting impact." "It will," Marcus said confidently, "because it's rooted in truth and justice." They sat in companionable silence, watching as stars began to dot the evening sky. Years later, the incident remained a catalyst for significant reforms in Riverdale and beyond. The legislation Daniel helped to craft was passed, leading to better training, oversight, and accountability within the police force. The community saw improvements in relations between law enforcement and citizens, and while challenges persisted, progress was undeniable. Marcus continued to live in his beloved neighborhood, witnessing the positive changes alongside his son. One day, as they attended the opening of a new community center aimed at fostering dialogue and understanding, a young man approached them. "Mr. Thompson?" he said nervously. "Yes," Daniel replied. "I just wanted to thank you for everything you've done. My brother was a victim of police misconduct, and your work has given us hope." Daniel shook the man's hand warmly. "I'm glad to hear that. We're all in this together." Marcus watched the exchange with pride. "You see," he said to Daniel after the young man walked away, "your efforts are touching lives." Daniel smiled. "It's a collective effort, and it's far from over." "I wouldn't expect anything less from my son," Marcus said, his eyes twinkling. As they left the center, Daniel looked over at his father. "How about we grab some dinner? My treat." "Sounds good to me," Marcus agreed. They made their way down the street, the same one where the incident had occurred years before. It was a symbol of how far they had come and a reminder of the work that still lay ahead. "Do you ever think about that day?" Daniel asked quietly. Marcus was silent for a moment. "Sometimes, but I try not to dwell on it. I'm more interested in what came after." Daniel nodded. "Me too." They continued on, the evening air filled with the sounds of laughter and conversation. The neighborhood had changed, but its heart remained the same. "Remember," Marcus said, "it's not just about fighting against something. It's about fighting for something, for a future where everyone is treated with dignity and respect." Daniel looked at his father, admiration evident in his eyes. "You've always been my inspiration." "And you mine," Marcus replied. They walked on together, father and son, united in purpose and hope for a better tomorrow.